Hello and welcome. My name is Lisa Hoashi, and today I'm sharing my own sabbatical story. This story has been divided over 2 episodes, so if you haven't caught last week's episode, part 1 of my story, I recommend that you go back and listen to that. That is everything that happened up until the point when I had my last day of work. Today, we're going to be talking about the actual adventure side of my story, when the journey actually gets going after all of this planning and deliberation and worry and fears. What happened as soon as I had that last day of work and everything that happened afterwards? I'm really excited to tell this story to you today because I haven't told it in so much detail to such a wide audience, and that's really exciting to me. This is really the juicy side to my story. It's got adventure, it's got a little bit of danger, it's got love, and it's got lots of twists and turns and surprises and fortuitous chance meetings and people who came along my way who helped me out and who changed the direction of my life. To me, even now, what is the amazing part of this story is that I set out on this journey really not knowing a lot of things. I didn't know where I was going to end up for work or where I was going to live or how the rest of my life was going to unfold. And it was very much a leap of faith. And for a lot of my journey, I just had to live in that not knowing. And I just had to kind of take some steps, a lot of times in the dark or on intuition, and just keep on and to have faith that things were going to become clear. And the amazing thing is that things did come clear, but not until the very, very end of my journey. And that, I think, is the most satisfying thing, is that I did, in the end, find clarity and resolution. I hope you enjoy this story and walk away with something new that you can apply to your own leap in life. This is Leap Like Me, the show about the leaps people take to make the most of this amazing life. Okay, let's go. This is part 2 of my sabbatical story. Let's first set the scene one more time. I'm 34 years old. I've just had my last day at work. I have just left a successful career in humanitarian aid and international development as a communications professional. I live in Portland, Oregon. I am totally downsizing, getting rid of my Portland apartment. I am getting rid of the majority of my possessions because I'm totally open-ended about where these next 12 months are going to take me. There's the possibility that I may want to find a place to live abroad. So I'm thinking of doing that maybe for 1 or 2 years. I'm really interested in taking this time to get out in the world. My long-term plan, though, for my life is to eventually come back to the Pacific Northwest. Maybe not to Portland proper, maybe somewhere smaller, maybe somewhere closer to the country and to nature. But my idea is to go back to this area because it's where my family's from and where I have this wonderful community. In fact, people have said to me, oh, while you're out traveling, you'll definitely meet someone special. You'll fall in love. This is where it's all going to happen. And I actually didn't want that to happen because I wanted so much not to meet someone out in the world and have that kind of complication. I wanted to go back to the Pacific Northwest. My fear that I would meet someone on this journey who would not be from the Pacific Northwest was actually big and real enough that I used it as one of my excuses for why I shouldn't take my sabbatical. And my therapist at the time, who you would have heard about in the last episode, part 1 of my story, she helped me talk through a lot of these fears. And here's what came of that conversation. So I said, I'm really afraid about going out in the world and meeting someone who's not from the Pacific Northwest. I really want to come back here and I want to build with my life with someone who's from here. And she said, well, what if you could be a little bit more open-minded about that? What if you did meet someone and maybe they're not from here, but they love this place and they could share it with you? Would that be enough? And grudgingly in that conversation, I said, okay, maybe that would be enough. Okay, so maybe that's a little heavy-handed foreshadowing here. But the point that I really want to make is that I was setting on this journey alone and I was single. And even though I was doing this wide open, adventurous thing, it was very much on my mind that the next thing that I really wanted to happen and that I had some pressure about because I was 34 years old was whether I was going to be able to have kids and whether I would find someone who I could have that family with, who would be the right person to start that new life with. Here's what I remember of that very first morning after I had quit my job. It was Monday morning, and I knew that the rest of the world was going off to work, and I was sitting in my kitchen finishing up my breakfast and just contemplating what I had just done. I no longer had gainful employment. I was finishing up my project of getting rid of most of my possessions and getting ready to go on this adventure that was going to start with me essentially living out of my car. I definitely felt very nervous and strange. It was kind of an out-of-body experience that took a while to get used to, of this totally kind of different status that I had in the world. I no longer had the usual trappings of a successful professional to sort of shield me anymore from who I was in the world. Here's how the plan looked that I had in front of me. First of all, a major sort of guiding principle of my plan was that I wanted to have as much summer as possible and avoid as much winter as possible. So, as you might have heard from other people on the podcast who are from the Pacific Northwest, the rain can really get you down. And so when you're thinking about planning your perfect year, it's going to involve a lot of sun. At least that's what I've heard corroborated from a lot of other stories. And the same was true for my own. I had purposefully set my quit date for May because I was planning on using the US summer to really enjoy the Pacific Northwest, to have the perfect Oregon and Washington summertime. So this was going to allow me to do all the backpacking and camping and outdoor activities that I wanted to do every year, but I had been stuck in the office and I couldn't go do. So this was my plan for my first 3 months. I also had a lot of visits built in to go see friends. The way that this US portion of my sabbatical worked logistically was that I was essentially moving out of my apartment and into my 2-door Honda Civic. So all of my camping supplies were in my Honda Civic and everything that I would need for the summertime. Then in October, I planned to catch a flight to Mexico. I had spent a lot of time in Mexico. I was kind of obsessed with it. And well, I still am. And I love it there. So I was planning on sussing out some new cities in Mexico and looking around to see if I might want to live in one of these places for 1 to 2 years as a sort of live abroad adventure after I finished my sabbatical. I had chosen to go to Mexico as my first overseas destination because I knew how to live on a budget there. And I always feel really good when I'm in Mexico. So I just thought it would give me a really good boost to my morale and to my confidence to go there as my first overseas location solo. In South America, I planned on first visiting Peru and Bolivia for about a month, then going to spend a month in Chile and then a month in Argentina. That was the basic itinerary I had come up with. And then I would figure out what I wanted to do with my last remaining month. And then I didn't know what I was going to do. Maybe I was going to come back to the US. Maybe I was going to go to Mexico. I didn't know what was going to happen after that. That's as far as my plan took me. And I had a budget laid out for each of those steps. Here's what actually happened. Part 1 of my story. USA. May I spent primarily dealing with my apartment and my possessions and logistics for the trip, final packing up, and also saying goodbyes. And the idea had been to really enjoy the last of my time in Portland. But frankly, it just felt sad and difficult to do these goodbyes. And so I did the best I could to enjoy it. But really, I just kind of felt weird at this point. I felt the difference between me and my friends and between my community and the other people I knew in my life there. I had made this bold break and I was about to take off and do something totally different. while they remained at home doing the same thing. And I felt kind of strange about that. And like I didn't fit in anymore. So if I were to do it again, I'll just tell you right now, I would have left a little bit more sooner. June was spent visiting friends on the East Coast and also in visiting my sister near Seattle. This too, I have to say, was a little bit of an uncertain time. I remember meeting up with a friend for coffee in New York City and explaining to him what I was doing. And I just felt, again, just kind of odd. And I worried a lot about money, like especially to New York City, thinking about, oh, should I be buying this coffee? Oh, should we be going out to dinner tonight? It was still really kind of difficult for me to feel confidence around money and around my budget. I just felt a lot of kind of like nervousness every time I got my wallet out, knowing that I was no longer bringing in income. One important thing that did happen in New York was that I met up with a friend who's an editor, and he offered me a regular column in this online magazine that he was working for during my sabbatical. And at first, I was really attracted to the idea and thought, wow, this has really helped me give me a purpose to my sabbatical. And then I realized that I actually really didn't want to become distracted from what the bigger purpose of my sabbatical was, which was really to take a break from this kind of responsibility and being on the line and having to meet deadlines. I eventually said no to that. That was an important decision that I made that lasted throughout my sabbatical. I made the choice to be offline, to not blog, to not write anything that was geared toward publication. I didn't have any responsibilities or obligations to kind of interact with the professional world. At my sister's house too, I remember going to a party with them in Seattle and having to make party small talk, with people I didn't know and having to explain what I was doing. And I also felt just kind of like a weirdo and like, what was I doing? It's what happens at this moment is that you no longer know exactly how to explain yourself to people. Whereas you might be able to say before, oh, I do this for my job and I live here. It was like, oh, I'm not working. I don't know where I'm going. And, I even remember I don't think it was at this party. I think it was at a different one, but some, friend of a friend said to me when we were saying goodbye, she said, I really hope you find what it is you're looking for. I remember feeling really offended by that. It kind of felt condescending what she was saying to me. And I also was kind of defensive. I was like, who says I'm looking for anything? I'm doing this thing that I really want to do. And I think it was really difficult for me to admit at that point in time that I was searching for anything. Because the thing about searching for something, it kind of entails that you're lost, right? And that was really something that was difficult for me to admit. Then in late June and July, I finally got outdoors and I was able to finally accomplish a really big goal of mine, which was to spend 1 week on a solo backpacking trip. And I did this in the Olympic National Forest in Washington, and it was amazing. I loved it. I had such a good time. It really fed my soul and just gave me this wonderful boost of confidence. It was here, too, that there was a really important turning point. I was in the trailhead parking lot, standing at the back of my car, going through my backpack because it was way too heavy and I was trying to get rid of extra weight and going through it, when I heard a voice call out from behind me. This guy said, "Hey, do you think that I'm going to need gaiters?" And I was just like, what? Because I had no idea. Gaiters were like a level of backpacking gear that I was definitely not at yet. I turn around and I see this really thin, wiry, tall, older white guy who's standing at the back of his SUV loading some really nice gear into a really expensive looking backpack. Usually at trailheads, especially if I'm alone, I'm a little bit leery about interacting a lot with people. I think I'm kind of worried and on guard about people breaking into my car or kind of being watched or followed, that kind of thing. So I was a little leery about talking to someone in the parking lot, but he was so earnest and even kind of a little nerdy that I really felt like, okay, this guy's not a threat. As it turned out, we did meet later on the trail and struck up conversation and spent some time walking together and chatting. And I learned a little bit more about him. He was from Seattle, which I kind of had guessed. And he was retired. I had also guessed that. And he was actually an ex-executive for Microsoft. So maybe that explains a little bit of the nerdiness. And he really endeared me, though, right away, because he said that now that he was retired, being out in the forest like this was all that he wanted to do. And his wife was not so interested in being outdoors, but he had spent so many years, probably from his glass corner office from Seattle, looking out over the Puget Sound. And he had dreamed about spending time out there. And now he could finally do it. And he said this is just what he wanted to do. And I, of course, being recently liberated from the office myself, could totally relate. I told him about my sabbatical and about quitting my job and where I was at life. And it turned out that we just had this really wonderful connection around this idea of really wanting to seek bigger things in our lives and wanting to become better people. And we're really interested in this idea around, I told him about how my life coach had helped inspire me with this. And it turned out he had done a fair amount of coaching and employee development at Microsoft. And we just had this really great connection with each other. And we're within a short period of time talking about the bigger elements of life. I felt so good with him. I found myself opening up with him in ways that I hadn't even opened up to my closest friends in the last month or so. And I just started telling him a little bit about how I was feeling like being unemployed now. And I actually had thought he would have some judgment around that, like being this important person at Microsoft, that he would have told me, what are you doing with your career? You should be working right now. But instead, he was super understanding and supportive of what I was doing. And that was wonderful. I also felt like I could be really open with him about my doubts about my timing of taking this trip and how I really felt conflicted about taking this time for myself and feeling like it was going to take me off my eventual path and my eventual goals of really wanting to meet someone special and have a family with them. And he just took all this in, and it was really great for me even just to be able to voice all of these doubts and insecurities that were going on right now. We ended up becoming kind of trail buddies, and though I lost track of him that first day, he camped somewhere else and I camped somewhere more up the trail, I think. We ran into each other on the second day, and we ended up spending that second day mostly together. And while we were on that last little hike of the afternoon, I remember he was walking behind me, and all of a sudden I heard him say, Lisa, if I can offer you a little bit of unsolicited advice. He said, don't worry about having kids. He said, if I were to go back and do it again, he was like, maybe I wouldn't have kids. He said, it's really easy to have a baby, but it's not so easy to have a 20-year-old. And he had mentioned that his own kids had some problems, both finding their careers, and also another child had problems with drugs and alcohol. So he had been having a really hard time of it lately with his older adult children. He said, if you meet the perfect person and everything works out just right, then by all means, go ahead and have children. But he said, if you don't find exactly the right person, don't force it. And it's going to be okay. He said, children bring meaning to life, but they aren't the meaning of life. Since he was leaving that afternoon and I had 6 more days in the wilderness stretching out in front of me, I had plenty of time to think about those words. And they were amazingly freeing for me. And I did realize that I could kind of just let go of this worry for now. And I really thought that what he said was true, that if this particular thing didn't work out for me, that it was going to be okay. And that he was absolutely right, that there are more ways of bringing meaning into my life. It didn't just have to be one thing. This chance meeting with such a special and wise person created in me a lightness and an openness that I hadn't had before. and that I really needed to make the most of my time off. I mark this as a turning point because I have a hunch that this openness and more positive mindset completely influenced everything that happened next. I then in August went to Idaho to see my dad. He lives in a small town on the Oregon-Idaho border where he is originally from. And then I went on to Wyoming, where a friend had loaned me his family's cabin, and I was going to do my own self-styled writing retreat for a couple of weeks. At the end of August, being in Wyoming at this cabin, I was feeling just like I was tired of being on my own for so long. And I had actually had a run-in with a cowboy neighbor of this cabin, and it had kind of made me feel unsafe and like just not happy with what I was doing. And I just felt like I needed a change of scenery. I went on to go visit a friend in Denver. And around that same time, I got an email from a friend who said, "Hey, Lisa, I just had this crazy idea. I have plans in September to go to the south of France, and I'm going to do a language immersion class. And I've already rented an apartment there in Provence, and I think you should come and join me." This, of course, was a crazy idea because I had no plans to go to Europe at this point. I was supposed to be thinking about going to Mexico at this point. It was also a crazy idea because I didn't really have the budget to go to Europe. It would mean buying a ticket and leaving in just a week or so. And it also meant leaving my car at my friend's place in Denver. So just kind of abandoning ship in the USA. So I spent a little bit of time thinking about it. And she's a very persuasive person. And she says, "Listen, you're unemployed and traveling around, and you really have no good excuse not to do this." So I said, okay. And that's how I found myself entering into part 2 of this story, which happened by me deciding to board a plane in Denver, Colorado, and get off in Marseille, France. Part 2, Europe. It was early September when I met up with one of my best friends in Provence, and we had a wonderful couple of weeks together. I was really excited to be in this part of the world. I had long wanted to go to southern France, and I also had plans to travel along solo to Tuscany, then on to Barcelona. Both Italy and Spain were 2 places I had also really wanted to go. So I was checking those off of my overall life bucket list. Provence and, of course, the French Riviera are known for being very magical places, of course, and I just felt really good. I felt good both for the environment that I was in, and also it felt like with this total change of scenery and being out of the country in this way was just marked a really nice shift for me. It felt like all the anxiety and all the difficulties that I'd kind of experienced in the first part of my sabbatical, that I was having the opportunity to let those drop away. I was still concerned about money because I hadn't budgeted for Europe, and obviously it's a little bit more expensive than the places that I had planned on traveling in Latin America. So one thing I decided to do for the solo portion of my trip was to try out couch surfing for the first time. I'd had a boyfriend who had traveled the world using couch surfing, and he had spoken really highly of it. He said he had met wonderful people and just had a really great travel experiences this way. Couchsurfing is a free organization that connects locals with travelers. The way it works is that you have a website where everyone has a profile, and you can then check out people's profiles. You can read the reviews that other people have left of them. As a traveler, you can find a host and request to stay with them, and you guys negotiate how many days that would be and when it would be, what works best for them. And then also usually you decide on how you'll spend the time together. Maybe they're really busy and you'll just be sleeping there and doing tourism on your own during the day. Or maybe you want to spend more time together doing some activity together or learning or sharing something with them. The overall idea, though, is that you're there as their guest. And the idea is to have some sort of cultural exchange and connection. When I went to Tuscany, I had my first couch surfing experience, and I had a wonderful experience. my host took me around all over the place, these really beautiful places around Tuscany that if I had gone by myself would have been kind of these cold tourist locations. And instead with her, we went to the local hot springs. We had spaghetti dinner with her friends that they made at home. I also went to soccer practice with her. And it was just such a rich and really fun experience. I absolutely loved it. So when I went on then to Spain and I went to Barcelona, I was thinking, hey, this couch surfing thing is so great and perfect for a solo traveler who wants to feel connected and learn more about the culture and the insider's view about what life is really like here. I want to use it again in Barcelona. I reached out to a number of hosts in Barcelona, but because there are so many tourists that go to Barcelona, I didn't have much luck with that. However, Couchsurfing gives you the option of posting your request for a place to stay on a communal bulletin board. So I also did that as well. So randomly, a few days later, I got a message from someone inviting me to come stay with them. It was a farmer who lived 100 kilometers north of Barcelona. And he said that he invited me to come stay at his farm because, number one, we could go out for hiking together in the nearby mountains. And number two, he loved my home state. He loved Oregon. I had actually decided for my first couple of couch surfing experiences to just seek out single women or couples to stay with because I just felt like it might be safer as I was kind of learning the ropes. So a single guy was not someone I was looking to stay with, but I was really intrigued. I had wanted to visit a farm or go out in the country, either in Italy or in Spain. And this was kind of the perfect opportunity. And also I wondered, why on earth would a Catalan farmer love Oregon? I felt like I had to get to the bottom of that. The other thing was that this guy had had a ton of reviews from other travelers on his profile. It seemed like he had hosted, I don't know, as many as 70 other travelers, and they had all given raving reviews about how wonderful he was. So I felt like that was recommendation enough. The other thing I did was I chose to arrive at midday on the bus. So if anything happened and I didn't feel comfortable, then I could easily make my escape and find other plans before nightfall. He came to pick me up at the bus stop. His name was Manel, and he just happened to be exactly the same age that I was. As a single woman, of course, I had to kind of check him out. And my first impression was that he was a really nice guy, but maybe not exactly my type. Yeah, we really hit it off and we had a great time together. And we had kind of a magical first day that day. First of all, where he lived was incredibly beautiful. There were these mountains in the background. He lived in this medieval stone house that overlooked this beautiful valley of rolling fields, and it was gorgeous. I loved it. We also that day went out and went mushroom hunting in the mountains, which was something that I always had wanted to learn how to do in Oregon. And so that was like a dream come true for me. And then we got to go home and eat them and make all this yummy food and drink great wine and have great conversation. It's so funny. I went to bed that night and I wrote in my journal, it's hard not to fall a little bit in love with this place and with this man and the way he lives his life. I was in some kind of denial at that point because I actually thought I was making simply an objective observation in my journal. Over the next couple of days, Manel and I did end up falling for each other to my total surprise. We just had so much in common and such a connection. It was amazing to find that in someone who was from a totally different culture and background in this part of the world that I didn't know existed before. Just one of those coincidental things that we had in common turned out to be his connection to Oregon. He had discovered many years before a website where farmers from around the world shared photographs of their farming work. So basically, it was a forum for farmers to geek out with each other about tractors and other equipment, combines, harvests, and could share with each other what their everyday work was like. Manel had discovered a farmer who lived in wheat farming country in Oregon, which is in the eastern part of the state. And this farmer had shared photographs with Manel of rolling wheat fields with majestic Mount Hood in the background, and Manel had completely fallen in love with this landscape and was super fascinated with Oregon and dreamed of traveling there. Well, what was really coincidental is this is the area of Oregon that is quite unknown for people who live in Portland, but is well known to me because my mother grew up in this area. I couldn't believe that a Catalan farmer would know about this little tiny town in Oregon that also was an area that was very dear to me as well. Now I had a real dilemma on my hands because I was supposed to leave Barcelona the following week, and I was going to be flying back to Denver, picking up my car, making my way over to Portland, where I had a ticket already bought to fly to Mexico. Manel and I both realized how special this was, and we started talking about what the options were. And of course, I could extend my trip and stay on longer, or I could continue on with my journey. And at this point, it was so hard to make a call because this was so new, and it was really hard to see where it could go because we also talked about that. His livelihood was here on this farmland. And for me, I really wanted to go back to the Pacific Northwest and have my life be there when all of this was over. So we really didn't know what to do. All we knew was that this was really special, and we promised that we would try to see each other again in the future and stay in touch. It was with real sadness that I said goodbye to Manel, and I got on the plane that took me from Barcelona back to Denver, Colorado. That didn't last very long, though. Within a month, I was back at the Barcelona airport and Manel was picking me up. When I had gotten back to the United States, I had picked up my car and done my road trip back through Idaho and stopped in to see my dad and also headed back to Portland, where I talked to my mom. And with both of them, I shared my dilemma and told how I'd met this really special person. And I was surprised that neither of them gave me a lot of resistance about my turning back around and getting on a plane and going back to Spain. My mom even said, "I think it's a great opportunity," and I couldn't believe it. So I talked to Manel and he was game, and I changed my ticket from Mexico back to Barcelona, which only cost $50, and it seemed like a sign. I lived with Manel for a couple of months and we had a wonderful time. It was just really kind of perfect, except for the fact that my visa was running out in December and I would be kicked out of the Schengen area and would need to be out for at least 3 months. There was, of course, the options of riskily staying on and sort of pushing the limits of my visa and seeing what consequences might come. But Manel and I were at the point in our relationship that we did not want to jeopardize either of our status in each other's country because we wanted potentially to be able to continue this relationship and stay together and not have problems entering each other's country in the future. It was so hard to accept, but essentially that meant that I was going to need to leave. And the only thing that made sense at that time was to continue on my journey as I had originally planned it. And at this point in time, I was supposed to be in South America. I bought a one-way ticket from Barcelona to Buenos Aires. Part 3, South America. I arrived in Buenos Aires in the dog days of summer. It was a stinky, hot, and also kind of angry city because they kept having power cuts. And so there would be burning tires and protests at night. It kind of just suited my terrible mood because I was miserable. I was so sad and could not believe that I had just been exiled from my new love and this new place that I wanted to be. And I was now on a completely different continent. I felt so lost and unhappy about the stretch of time that I saw spanning in front of me. What was even more depressing and lonely was that Christmas was the following week. I kicked around Buenos Aires for a few days, and in my misery, I wrote an email to a friend of mine back in the States, telling her how sad I was and depressed, and what was I doing here, and what was I going to do here for months. And she wrote back to me and said, "It's okay that you're miserable and that you're writing me this. It's okay to let all these feelings out." She said, you can be depressed and sad, and you also still need to stick your hand out and hail a cab. I really racked my brains for what I could do. There's a possibility of traveling north into Argentina, into wine country where it was going to be hot. There was going further north into Uruguay or to Brazil. But none of those things really sounded appealing. I couldn't really imagine myself there. The only thing that I could imagine that could possibly make me feel better would be to go back into nature and go to the mountains, which is where I always felt good. And I knew I would feel like myself again. So I caught a 24-hour bus to northern Patagonia. This is the other major turning point in my story. I thought Patagonia was beautiful. I immediately was entranced and my imagination just started going forward like, wow, look at this place. There's so much exploring to do. And I actually had this crisis because I could see that there was so much that could happen in the next 3 or 4 months. I was going to do so much traveling. I would meet so many different people. How could this new relationship possibly weather me roaming around South America? Like so many things could happen. So many things could put even more distance in between us. So in a desperate phone call, I told him, leave everything and come join me in South America. Which he said, I can't. And that was really hard to hear. But it was something that I kind of had to throw out there and just sort of a crisis I needed to have. And I think he understood how bad I felt about being so far away from him. And we started to then make more concrete plans for when we would see each other again. And he said that he would come to Oregon after the 3 months were up in South America. I could continue on and meet him for my last month of my sabbatical in Oregon with him, and we would do a trip together. The other thing that really ended up working out was that being in Patagonia, I realized that I wanted to do more exploring. I wanted to do some backpacking, but I didn't feel safe doing that solo in a wilderness that was totally unfamiliar. So I would need to find a backpacking partner. Couchsurfing once again came to the rescue. I started looking around on their bulletin boards for other travelers that had been looking for travel partners or backpacking partners in this part of the world. And I saw this post from a 23-year-old German girl who had actually posted several months before that she was looking for a travel partner. And I wrote to her, even though it had been months before and she was probably long gone by this time. But to my delight, the day after Christmas, which I had depressingly spent in a hostel, I heard back from her and she said she was only 2 hours south of me and I could easily travel there by bus. And this place was actually the launching point that she was intending for a grand adventure. She wanted to hitchhike from this place in northern Patagonia all the way down to Tierra del Fuego. And she wanted to hitchhike all along the Carretera Austral, which is the scenic and only highway that runs through the very southern tip of Chile. We made a Skype date and I liked her immediately. I was surprised because we were 11 years apart, but I really liked her sense of adventure and the fact that she already had a pretty clear plan about how she would approach this adventure and just an organized way of looking at the world in general. I had a really good feeling that we would make good travel partners. Sometimes Americans and Germans are a really good combination, and that was true for me and Karen. We were really in agreement about how we wanted to do this journey. We did it really slow, hitchhiking maybe 60 to 100 kilometers a day, which was really similar to what a lot of the people who were bicycling the same route were doing. So we became friends with them along the way. And we also did it really cheap. So there was a lot of cheese and avocado sandwiches. Chile has some of the best avocados in the world, I think. Hitchhiking is very safe and really enjoyable in this part of the world. People are really nice. And it's a great way to chat with people and to see the landscape at a very slow pace. And we also did lots of backpacking off the road and went into really remote wilderness, which was so beautiful. It was really a magnificent landscape and a place to be in the world. Manel and I somehow got into the habit of keeping in touch every day. Wherever I was along the road, if it was possible for me to find a Wi-Fi signal, I would give him a quick call. He was so great. He would be available almost at any hour of any day to receive my call. And it really was just great to continue to grow our relationship along the road and to feel his presence, even as I was out in these super remote places. Karen and I ended up traveling together for 2 months. Our grand finale was doing the full circuit at Torres del Paine, and it was just a wonderful end to our trip. And then we managed to hitchhike and finally took a bus all the way down to Punta Arenas, where my father actually was waiting for us. When I set out on my sabbatical year, I had sent an email out to my best friends and my family and had invited them all. I told them my approximate itinerary, and I told them that they were all welcome to join me for any part of my trip. And of all those people, my father was the only person who took me up on that invitation. And when I told him that I was going to Patagonia and invited him along, he said yes, because he had always wanted to go. This meant so much to me, especially retrospectively looking back at how worried I had been about his understanding and support for this journey of mine. It was incredible to go on this adventure with him. Sadly, it meant at this point that I said goodbye to Karen, and she continued on by herself all the way down to Tierra del Fuego. Meanwhile, my dad and I went back to Torres del Paine so that he could see the incredible mountains there, and we did some touring, and he even came hitchhiking with me. Then we boarded a ferry from Punta Arenas all the way up to Puerto Montt. After a few weeks of traveling with my father, he returned back to the United States, and I continued on to Chile's Central Valley, where my host family lived. I had been out of touch for nearly 17 years at this point. One excuse for being out of touch was that when I had lived with them, it had been pre-email, and we had lost touch given the difficulty of phone calls and letters, but also the fact that I had gone to college and become very absorbed in my own life there. But I had been carrying around with me a huge sense of guilt for being out of touch with them. And I just want to mark this point really briefly in my story, because despite feeling all that guilt, I reached out to them. When I found a phone number for them that worked, my host mother answered, and she was thrilled to hear from me. She said, "Oh my God, my long lost daughter has returned today." Within a couple of days, I was reinstalled in my old bedroom that I had had when I was 17 years old, and just back in the heart of my Chilean family, being taken all around by my host mother on her regular daily activities, seeing aunts and uncles and cousins and siblings, and it was really amazing to reconnect with them. It was a powerful reminder to me to get over feelings like that of guilt or shame about lost connections and being brave about reconnecting with people. 2 years later, my host mother passed away due to cancer, and it was so terribly sad. I was expecting my first daughter and was so excited about introducing her to my newfound Chilean mom. And that was also a very powerful reminder that the things that we want to do in life, we have to do them as soon as possible. Part 4, USA, back to Oregon. In April, I returned back to Oregon, and shortly after, Manel arrived for his first visit ever to the United States. After all this time apart, we were going to be reunited, and he was going to get to see Mount Hood in the flesh for the first time. In fact, Manel was so excited about seeing Mount Hood that he wanted to summit it. And even though I had no mountain climbing experience in my background, I decided that if he was going to climb Mount Hood, then I was going to climb it as well. Going into this trip, it's not like I had everything figured out. And in fact, there were moments when I could be really nervous and uncertain because after this month-long trip with Manel, I needed to make some big decisions about my life. Even I didn't know what was going to happen with our relationship. I didn't know where I was going to live, and I still didn't know what I was going to do for work. But I told Manel that I recognized how special our trip was together, and I really was excited to share my home state with him and also introduce him to my friends and family. So I asked him if maybe we could hold off any talk about what was next until the end of his trip. I was going to try to put it out of my mind and focus on the present moment as much as possible and hope that the answers to these questions would reveal themselves along the way. Manel and I reinstalled ourselves back in my Honda Civic, which had been collected from my father's house, and we set off on a month-long adventure around Oregon and some parts of Washington. In Oregon's wheat farming country, Manel got to see it for himself for the first time, and we stopped in and met the farmer who had introduced him to Oregon in the first place. We also did Summit Mount Hood, just the two of us. And after completing that grand adventure, I realized that this was the person that I really wanted to be with. He was an amazing teammate and partner, and I wanted to keep going with our relationship. So I told him the day after we summited Mount Hood that I wanted to go back to Spain to be with him. That took care of one major question then, where I was going to live, and that would be on the farm with him. The second major question, though, of what I was going to do for work still was outstanding. And I was clear about a few things, is that I still wanted to have really meaningful and challenging work. I didn't want to just move to this rural community and find some job teaching English or doing something that wasn't really going to be fulfilling to me. When faced with this problem, my first instinct was to go back to what I knew, and that would be to find a job with an international development organization that was based out of Europe. For example, Geneva is a major hub, and it was possible that I could work at a job in Geneva and have some remote time where I could be on the farm, but I would also need to travel a lot. The upside of this type of job is that it would provide a good salary, and also that I would potentially be able to be sponsored for a visa. I did know deep down that there were some problematic things with this idea. I was still unresolved about whether this was the right career for me and the right type of work for me. And I also knew that this type of lifestyle would not be super conducive to what I really wanted out of living on the farm, which was to have a slower pace and a more simpler, down-to-earth kind of lifestyle that didn't involve a lot of air travel, and that I could really enjoy and start to build my roots and my community in this place. I knew that having a job that sent me away a lot would probably not do great things for my relationship or for new friendships and community that I would build in this place. It was Manel who finally called me out. And he said, "Lisa, are you sure that you really want to go and work for somebody else when this would be the perfect opportunity for you to start your own business?" I felt so incredibly loved and seen at that moment because he was seeing something about me that I was not even able to entirely see about myself. And that was that it was a very scary and maybe unarticulated dream at that point to have my own business and to be my own boss. And really just in the next few moments, it kind of all clicked into place that if I was really brave and really confessed what I really wanted to do, it would be to look into becoming a life coach that would help people on similar journeys like my own. From there, things really did start falling into place. I did research on life coaching. I talked with other life coaches. I looked into certification programs, and I got ready to move to Spain. By the September of 2014, so just over a year from when I set out on my journey, I arrived in Spain. I set up my life coaching business, and Manel and I, in the end, decided that we would get married. And that was going to take care of my visa problem. And even though my story really has a happy ending, I want to be sure to convey as well how hard that moment of transition was too. That leap was also a difficult one. And in some ways, it was even more difficult than my initial sabbatical leap. Possibly because I wasn't even expecting how difficult it would be to change cultures and also to start my own business. Fortunately, the relationship part went really easy. I think marrying Manel was the easiest part. But the other two parts were really, really difficult and unexpected. So I don't want to act like I have a fairy tale ending. There's been a lot of work and struggle and growth that has even happened after that point. But this, for now, is my sabbatical story, and I'll have to tell you the rest of the story some other time. To wrap up today's episode, I want to answer the 3 questions that I generally pose each guest on the show. Question number 1, what do you wish you had known before you took your leap? I wish that I had known that when you're in the middle of your situation, it's hard to see things clearly. So when I anticipated the leap that I needed to take, I felt like I was just listening to this small little voice inside that was telling me that things were off and that there might be something more out there for me. When in fact, now in retrospect, I can see that there were big signals all over the place that things weren't working out for me. How unhappy I was with the dating scene, how lonely I felt in my apartment, how stressed out I was, how unfulfilled I felt in my work, and how wasteful I felt like my lifestyle was in terms of churning through so much time and money each month. This is why I think it's especially so important to have someone like a coach or a therapist to talk to at major transitions in life, because they can help you to see more clearly what's not working and to validate those feelings inside that are telling you that it's time to change. Number 2, what's the most unexpected thing that came of your leap? First of all, finding someone as incredible as my husband and then deciding to move for him, of course, was super unexpected. And someday I hope that we can go back, at least to have maybe a part-time home there. For now, though, I've realized that this lifestyle really suits me and is really what I want for right now. I also was totally surprised that out of this, I started my own business. I've also been totally blown away at the opportunity to have a baby. We welcomed our daughter into the world in 2017, and actually, in a few months, we're going to be welcoming a baby boy into our lives as well. Another unexpected thing that happens on a more personal level is that a leap like this really crystallizes your values. There are kind of 3 givens that happen when you take a sabbatical break like this. You get more self-confidence because you're doing something totally against the grain, but you're deciding to follow your heart, and that feels amazing, especially when you manage to pull it off. As part of a break like this, you necessarily have to downsize, and that means that you learn to live a more simple life. You learn to live on a limited budget because you don't have the protection anymore of an income. What happened for me is that I got even more conscientious about how I spend my money and my time, and I think that happens for a lot of people who take a break like this. The last question is, for someone who's thinking of doing something similar, what one piece of advice would you offer? If you have that little voice inside, a compelling idea that won't leave you alone, you should find a way to do it, and as soon as possible. Take time to make as good a plan as you can. Seek lots of advice and guidance from other people. They will help you do it better. Of all the voices that you'll hear in your life, this is the one you should listen to. It's the one that ultimately leads to fulfillment and joy. You've got to trust it. I learned from this journey that there's nothing more powerful than keeping promises to yourself. That will change your life. Thank you for listening all the way to the end of today's episode. It's been such a pleasure to share this story with you. If you have questions about any part of my sabbatical journey or planning any of that, head on over to the Leap Like Me community on Facebook and post your questions there. I'm happy to answer any of them. Also, stop on by lisahoashi.com for the show notes. I've included photos there from each part of my journey. If you know someone who would really benefit from hearing this story, please pass it along to them. And also, please leave us a rating or a review on iTunes if you're enjoying the show and getting something out of it. This is the way that we can help reach more people with these types of stories. I'm Lisa Hoashi, and this is Leap Like Me. Thanks for listening.